Make a little mistake there. Hi, everybody. This is Joe Firestone, and it's my regular Saturday night show for Real Progressives. And my guest for tonight is Peter Jacob. But Peter Jacob is running for the nomination of the Democratic Party on a progressive platform with a very progressive grassroots, no contributions from corporations, but campaign. He's running in the New Jersey 7th District. And in this broadcast, he will talk to us about his platform, the things he feels very strongly about. And I will question him, and you will question him as well, I'm sure. Okay, but I think we're going to have a very good show, and that you'll like it very much. So I'm going to take the promo away now, and we'll share the screen for a while. And I'll give the floor to Peter.
Yes.
Hi, Peter.
Hello, Joe. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. How you doing?
Awesome to be here. Feeling great.
Okay, well, it's awesome to have you here as well. So tell us about your platform, please.
Yeah. So, again, my name is Peter Jacob, running for U.S. Congress in the 7th Congressional District here in New Jersey. We're running on a bold platform called the People's Platform. And we called it that before some other groups like Our Revolution called it the People's Platform, for the record. Our platform is simple and straightforward. We know that incomes have been stagnant for over the past 30 to 40 years. The American people they've earned a living wage in our country. We need a $15 minimum wage. We're part of that fight. We know your income determines how you live. It shouldn't determine if you live. We know that medical bills are the leading cause of bankruptcy. And even after the passage of the ACA, 30 million people are uninsured and several million are underinsured. And even the insured can't even get health care. So we need to ensure that we have health care in America and not health insurance. And the only path forward is a single-payer Medicare for all system. We need to transition our economy away from dirty fossil fuels and polluters into an economy that is 100% reliant on green, clean energy. And have us here in New Jersey, the Garden State, live up to that name. I support the OFF Act, which is Tulsi Gabbard's bill. We need to switch over to 100% clean energy by 2035. I would have said yesterday, but that's the past. So we got to do this now. But to address any of these issues, if we want to address gun violence, if we want to address equal pay, no matter what the issue is, it comes back to one fundamental problem. That is the role of money. There is a tsunami of money that floods the pockets of politicians and drowns out all of our voices. We need to get big, corrupt money out of politics and restore the people's voice. And that's, basically along with education, protecting net neutrality, and all that other good stuff. That is our People's Platform. And you can learn about it at jacob2018.com.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Can we get into the details of your platform now?
Yeah.
The first item in it is healthcare. So could you tell us a little bit more about that? You've already said that you favor a single-payer system. Okay, and on your website it says you favor HR 676, expanded and improve Medicare for All Act. And okay, could you tell us what's in that act, please?
Yep. There is an amazing program in our country. It is single payer. It's called Medicare. 85% of people who are on Medicare approve of it. When I go out throughout my district, which is a Republican-leaning district, and I ask folks, who is here on Medicare? You see a bunch of hands go up. And then I ask, well, do you like Medicare? Is it working for you? Their hands maintain raised, and they're all shaking their heads. Do you think it will work if we expand it and insure it for everybody? They say yes. So the fundamental thing that we need to do is take a program that is working and expand it to all people. It's not perfect, but it is a program that works, and every other nation is doing it. When you have a country where medical bills are the leading cause of bankruptcy, when you have a nation in which people who are working cannot afford healthcare, who wait till the last minute when things are dire to go see a physician, when you have something like GoFundMe, and the overwhelming majority of GoFundMe funds are directed towards healthcare. People who cannot afford healthcare. That is a failing in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. So there's only one simple solution to this, and that is the single-payer Medicare for all healthcare system in America. It needs to be done. We're spending way too much on healthcare. We spend nearly twice as much as the average of the next 30 nations who are providing health care as a human right. I am in a contested primary here. I come across many Democrats who claim that they want healthcare as a human right. Everybody on the state says we want healthcare as a human right. But that's not backed by anything, right? The only way you could ensure healthcare as a human right, the only way you ensure a universal healthcare system is through a Medicare for all single-payer plan, period. And that is what we are supporting.
Okay, so first question. How does your preference, HR 676, compare to the Bernie Sanders bill? Okay, that's in the Senate at this point.
Mm-hmm. The Senate bill is a bit more detailed. HR 676 has been around for a while. John Conyers introduced it around a little over a decade ago. And the Sanders bill kind of builds upon that. We need to be able to negotiate drug prices. We need to be able to ensure that pretty much everyone is covered under this with no copays, no deductibles, no fundamental problems and barriers to access to care. It is not perfect. We need to continue to have discussions with regards to how we could improve it. But the fact that it's being put forward, and now Keith Ellison, he's taken the mantle for this past week, and he's running as the primary sponsor of it right now. I'm glad to see the conversation is there, and it's building. This is an ongoing conversation, I think, that needs to be had once we get enough progressives in office and make sure things are addressed in detail. I could say, for one fact, we are not discussing the formation or the fact that for-profits or even nonprofit hospitals are forced to act like for-profits these days. And these for-profits are creating these organizations. They're consolidating left and right. They're buying up nursing homes. They're buying up ambulatory centers, and they're becoming one large conglomeration. And I think this is something that needs to be addressed in a bill that advances HR 676 or the Sanders bill.
Okay, so in order to compare it with the Sanders bill, one of the first things to note is that the Sanders bill specifies a transitional period, okay, a 3-year period, and you only get the full Medicare for all in the 4th year. Okay, not everybody is covered, okay, but until the 4th year. So it goes by thirds, actually. Okay, and I guess then the 1st year is just a setup period, okay, in that bill. Whereas HR 676, that is implemented immediately. And by the end of the 1st year, the expectation is that everybody would be on HR 676. So my question is, on those grounds alone, why isn't the House bill a better bill? Mm-hmm. And to amplify this particular question, I want to consider just a couple of factors, okay, a few factors. First, there's the fatalities question. Some estimates, okay, of my own as to the fatality rates due to lack of insurance say that for the uninsured, one person out of 781 people are fatalities each year due to lack of insurance. So with 30 million people still off the insurance rolls, we're looking at about 35 million people 35,000 people per year under the ACA still dying due to lack of insurance. That's 10 times, okay, the number of fatalities due to 9/11 on that single day. Okay. So in Bernie's period, okay, the 3-year transition period, okay, in the first year, I guess the 35,000 would still be dying. In the second year, 12,000 would be cut off the death list. In the second year, 24,000, and in the third year, the remainder. Okay, so by the fourth year, there would be no fatalities due to lack of insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's the way that goes. So it seems to me the House bill would actually save
Lives immediately.
Yeah, lives immediately, and save 35,000 people each year. The House bill is in the first year, the House bill is fully in effect, whereas the Sanders bill, okay, is not. And then 24,000 people, then 12,000 people, and then finally zero. But that's a lot of lives for the sake of waiting through a transition period of 3 years before the bill goes fully into effect. Okay, there was a substantial death rate actually during the period 2010 to 2016. In other words, from the passage of the Affordable Care Act up to the end of the last administration. There was a substantial death rate, somewhere in the neighborhood of 350 to 400,000 people who died because a Medicare for All bill, that is an earlier version of this very House bill, was not passed in early 2009 as it should have been.
Right.
So I suppose my question ultimately is, when you talk about this, do you ever talk about the death toll that we've experienced since 2009 because we failed to pass a Medicare for All bill back then?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that is exactly the heart of why we are fighting for this. You know, people are dying, kids are dying, people every day who could live meaningful, purpose-filled lives have their lives cut short because they can't afford health care, or I should rather just say health insurance. As we do not actually have health care in this country, you rely on an insurance company to give you health care at most ages. So,
okay, but my question is really whether you talk about the death toll when you campaign.
Right.
Because I hardly see any candidate actually bringing that up when they advocate for Medicare for All. And to me, that is the most powerful argument for Medicare for All.
Exactly.
And it's never brought up by candidates. It seems that candidates think that it's impolite to bring that up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is what we're talking about. If we want to treat healthcare as a human right, we have to identify the fundamental problem in our nation, and that is people dying because they can't afford to access healthcare in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. And so,
yes, but in addition to dying, there are also the bankruptcies. There
Yep.
are also
Exactly. Leading
foreclosures
cause of bankruptcy. Yep. Yep.
on
I've seen it firsthand as a social worker.
right, and also divorces, family breakups,
Yep.
unhappiness, but desperation.
Right.
All of
Yeah.
these things, okay, are in the background and a part of the costs of the healthcare system that we've insisted upon up until this time.
Right. Yeah.
So I suppose my question was, how often do you talk about that in your
Yeah.
campaign? And there's a lot to
I
talk about
yeah.
that.
I tell a story about the social impacts. There was a family, and I worked as a community organizer, as a social worker, and I serve families in transitional housing programs. And I had a family come to our services. They never asked anybody for anything. And keep in mind, this is after the recession. They showed up. The husband, he worked, he got hurt, right? He lost his job. As a result, medical bills added up. The wife, she got her hours cut at work. She was a nurse. They ended up at our service. They were 1 month away from losing their home. They had three kids, three awesome kids who were, one was in middle school and the other two in elementary school. Never asked anybody for anything. And here they were, pretty much bankrupt because of medical bills. And they ended up in our services for about 4 to 6 months. They were able to save money, get back on their feet, and move forward. Uh, this could have been easily prevented had we had an insurance, had we had health care instead of health insurance, where that family didn't have to rely on social services, rather a structure in our society that could have taken care of this. It is my pure belief that the job of a social worker is ultimately to work themselves out of a job. That if we could address these crises, and I felt very often that I'm just putting a band-aid on these situations because there's many people. They were fortunate to come to our services. They're fortunate to have the ability to have a space in our transitional housing program, right? So that is what we want to address, so this could be prevented in the first place, so that family doesn't fall through the cracks, that they do not end up in situations where they're asking for help in that manner, that you have a system, a government, and an economy that protects them when things go bad and things are rough.
Okay, so let's move on to the economy category. You have a number of points on your website about that. Would you like to go through them for us, please?
Sure. So we first and foremost, one thing we have to do is raise the minimum wage to a living wage. And we do this over the course of the next 4 years. And I'm confident by 4 years it will be more than $15 as we see people's incomes rising, and their purchasing power increasing. Robert Reich famously points out to the virtuous cycle. You put money into the pockets of people. People have money. They have expendable cash. What do they go do? They don't just save it. They go and buy stuff in our economy. That enables those businesses, small or large, to employ more people. That increases the tax base. And that's how the economy works, essentially. The fundamental problem we have right now in America is that we are not paying people a fair wage, and wealth is being siphoned to the top 1% or the 0.1%. And they ultimately put it in overseas bank accounts and then go on Wall Street and pretty much gamble it, or put an extension on their summer home, or buy another yacht to compare with their fellow billionaire friends. So we want to see not a tax scam as the Republicans have put forward. We want to see actual tax reform. You need to close the carried interest loophole. You need to bring back all that money from overseas. That there's $1.4 trillion and counting in overseas bank accounts. And we need to bring that back. Invest it right here. We know our infrastructure is failing, and we need desperate investment as we are moving into a 21st century economy. And
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay, so I have a number of questions already. The first question is on the wage rate. Okay, what you'd like to see is an increase up to $15 per hour. Is $15 per hour actually a living wage in your district in Jersey?
Not in New Jersey. I'll tell you that much. It's not in New
So,
Jersey at all.
okay,
So
okay, okay. So let me ask the question then. So why not advocate for at least a living wage in your district?
yeah,
In other words, I suspect, okay, that a living wage in your district, it probably would be lower than in New York City, but it's probably around $20 an hour in your district as opposed to $15 an hour.
so I'll say this, in all honesty, in the state of New Jersey, for a single mother to be able to afford rent and put food on the table, she needs to be making at least $26 an hour, right?
Okay,
Yep.
okay,
So
okay.
that's the
So
reality. And
okay, there you go. Okay, now you say, I think somewhere in here, don't you say? I forget, but I thought I read this on your platform that you are for cost adjusting the minimum wage across the areas of the United States. Are you not for that? In other
so
words, cost of living adjustments.
yes, yes, absolutely. Look, as a social worker, I've served individuals on Social Security, disability income, as well as supplemental security income. They cannot afford to live. They couldn't afford making a check of $730 a month to be able to survive in a place like New Jersey. If we're promoting independence for these folks, and it's not the nonprofits, they're doing the work. But we realize if we don't have a system, if we don't have a government that serves the people, these folks are always going to be left unattended to.
Okay, so
So
let me
you
ask you
need,
further. Okay, what you seem to be doing here, okay, is to advocate that there be a federal minimum wage that would be
yes,
mandatory for businesses to comply with.
right,
Okay, and you expect the private sector to come up with the minimum wage. Okay, there is an alternative way to do that. Okay, there are a number of alternative ways, but the one I'm going to ask you about is why aren't you for a federal job guarantee at a living wage, cost adjusted according to the CPI, okay, across the country? Okay, so that such a living wage might perhaps average $20 an hour, okay, but be as low as 15 in some places,
right,
the middle of Kansas or something like that, and as high as $28 an hour, okay, in New York City, okay,
yeah.
something on that order. Why aren't you for such a program?
Yeah.
If you had such a program, then that would eliminate unemployment entirely. It could create a de facto minimum wage because if private sector businesses were not willing to pay that wage, they wouldn't be able to get any workers.
Right.
Okay, so it's a de facto minimum wage. Okay, but in a way, it doesn't force the private sector to bear all the burden. And the reason why it doesn't is the instant that people are signing on to a government program for such a living wage, their consumption power is increased overnight, and the sales of private businesses go through the roof. Therefore, the private businesses can afford a higher minimum wage themselves, okay, because of the increase in the consumption power and the boom in the economy which would result from that.
Right.
So why aren't you for that?
Yeah. So it's not that we're against it, right? It's being able to articulate this at this moment. And absolutely, when people talk about a jobs program, I think what FDR did back during the Depression, the government became the employer of last resort. And we're at that desperate moment right now. We are coming out of a financial crisis. We're walking right into the next one. and there
Okay,
is a
well, this
responsibility
is
for the
like,
government. Yes. Yep.
okay, this is like the ELR, but the name for it, okay, at present is the job guarantee, okay, the
Right.
JG, okay, and there are now a fair number of people across the country, but Tim Canova for one. Uh, okay, but there are other congressional candidates as well who are advocating for a JG.
Mhm.
Okay, and what I'd like to do is to urge you to look into that. It seems to me that would give you a competitive advantage over the establishment Democrats. Of course, I don't think there's anyone who's going to run to your left on that. Okay, but at the same time, it's automatically such a popular program with people because it takes away a tremendous amount, okay, of the anxiety that goes with a situation where the unemployment rate, even though it appears to be very low right now, we still live in a situation where that's the U3 unemployment rate, which vastly distorts the statistics, okay, of unemployment. According to it, there are only 6 million people who are still out there who want full-time work, whereas the actual number is somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 million people. So there would be a lot of people to employ with such a program.
Mhm.
And there are probably a considerable number of people in your district who would be benefiting from such a program.
Absolutely. Again, what we saw FDR do with the Works Progress Administration, the Public Works Administration, is put people to work. The Civilian Service Corporation preparing youth and young people. We have a ton of people. So in our district, if I may speak about that, we are actually a hub for big pharma and big telecom. In
Oh, I
fact, we
know.
have some of the leading solar panel integrators in all the East Coast, right in our 7th congressional district. Fundamental problem is there's not jobs. And a lot of young folks who go to school on the coast, they end up staying in New York City or in Boston or LA. They don't come back home. There's not many opportunities. And the fundamental problem is the consolidation and the monopolization of these industries, the fact that we are not enforcing antitrust laws in the same way Teddy and FDR have in their own right, ensuring that one day that young folks who come back, who got the ideas, I know these folks, I know the vision that they have, especially as we are transitioning to a 21st century economy, a smart economy, if you will. And the fact that we are transitioning away from fossil fuels. The problem is, and it's twofold, the fact that we are not enabling young folks to be these leaders because there is these monopolies by these industries. And the thing is also the next Jonas Salk, she is sitting at a desk job because she is a pre-existing condition. She needs the health insurance, the benefits at the job, preventing her from going on and finding the cure for Lyme disease, for example. The next Elon Musk, or who will outdo Elon Musk and send an actual human being in a roadster up into space, is sitting on a desk job crushed under the weight of student loan debt. And that is why we need to ensure a single payer Medicare for all system that enables people the freedom to be those entrepreneurs. We need to ensure that we fully fund higher education, public colleges, universities, tech schools, but also cancel student debt altogether and enable those people to become entrepreneurs ultimately, prepare the next
Okay.
generation to lead our economy. Yep.
Okay, well, we'll certainly get to those things,
Yeah.
okay, because those are things that I am quite enthusiastic about as well. But what I wanted to
And so,
emphasize is
that's
that
the area I want to.
a job guarantee
Yeah,
program, okay, a job guarantee program would be full of green jobs.
right.
In other words, if the green jobs did not exist in the private sector, okay, they would be supplied by the job guarantee sector. And the reason why they would be is because the way the program would operate would be that the federal government would be paying the bills, okay, but the jobs would be defined by local people, including the unemployed people themselves. Now, as part of the program would work like an entrepreneurial program, where people who were out of jobs would be free to propose new businesses having social value to the local authorities. And if those new businesses were approved by the local authorities, then the people going into them would be funded under the job guarantee program by the federal government. So you're looking at local programs all over the country in the areas that are most run down and depressed in the country, as well as in more prosperous districts, like your own, where there would be new businesses but growing up, having social value, and new kinds of efforts going on, so people could, one, continue to live in these other areas, not have to migrate to the cities, but two, if they wanted to migrate to other areas, for example, if they wanted to get out of Flint, Michigan, for obvious reasons, they would be able to go to Colorado and find a job waiting for them there. We don't have time in this particular session to explore the transformation that could exist from such a program. Okay, but I'd like to ask you to look into that program, find out what the job guarantee is. I can supply some references to you, tell you where the research is not only being done, but has been done now, okay, for many years, experimental programs, okay, in other countries, okay, including India, okay. And so there are things to learn, okay, about this area. They can be learned in a very short time. There are live streams on it, but many live streams on it. And this is still something that you could incorporate into your platform. Okay, but I did want to move to another question. And that question is, you say you want to repatriate the $1.4 trillion, okay, that is sitting overseas. Okay. Well, first of all, they're likely not sitting in banks overseas, but they might be sitting in the form of the Federal Reserve banks. In the form of Treasury securities, okay, but completely apart from where the dollars are actually sitting and whether they have to be physically brought back. They're not physically actually brought back anyway. Why do we need those dollars? Why do we need the $1.4 trillion? We have a government that is a fiat a sovereign government that can create its own reserves by order of Congress. Because Congress can order the Federal Reserve to fill the Treasury spending account with the money needed to spend the appropriations that Congress mandates. So why are we missing the 1.4 trillion? Why can't we just have Congress appropriate the $1.4 trillion in the form of various kinds of programs, get the Fed to fill the Treasury spending account so the federal government can spend that money on investments? Why do we need the private sector to bring back its money? But why do we need to give them tax incentives to bring back that money? Why do we need to allow them to loot us even further?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we really don't need that money, and we don't need them to repatriate the money. So why have that as something on your platform?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I believe we do need them to, because look, I pay my
Why?
taxes. I pay my taxes. Small businesses throughout our district and throughout our nation and the state of New Jersey pay what is their fair share of taxes. My family, we run a small business. We pay our fair share of taxes. When you don't pay your taxes, it clearly says that you don't care about the communities you're in. You don't care about the schools. You don't care about the waterways, the systems that ensure that our economy runs smoothly. That's what that says. That money that is lost is lost. That's theft from a child who deserves to be going to college,
That's
from someone who
true,
deserves love,
and I
right?
couldn't agree more. However, if you're faced with the following choice, they'll bring the 1.4 trillion back, okay, but only if you forgive half the taxes,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
or the other
And
choice,
that's not, yeah, go ahead.
okay, we need that investment. We need it now. We have a stagnant economy, as you have said yourself. Why not just have the federal government do the investment and worry about penalizing the people who took their money overseas, but later on? I mean, why should the people living in this country now have to wait, okay, in order to benefit from the investment that the federal government could easily supply now?
Right. Yep. In full agreement. We could do it now. We should have been invested in everything that we want to do with fixing our economy. If we just talk about infrastructure, the American Society of Civil Engineers downgraded the state of New Jersey 2 years ago from a C to a D. Complete failure. We just had a horrendous snowstorm. A week earlier, we had heavy wind. Things are down. People still don't have power, right? We
Yeah.
should have invested in these things to prevent something like this to be as horrible as it was. I mean, look at Superstorm Sandy. People still haven't moved back to their homes in the shore area.
Okay.
So
Again,
we could do
I
this already.
agree
And
more.
yep, and I
Okay.
agree with you wholeheartedly. We should not have to, play any games with them. This is about justice. This is about what is fair and right. And
Right. Okay. But you don't want to make the rest of us wait.
absolutely not. Yeah, we could do it now.
Okay.
Yeah,
So why don't
that's
we
what I'm
go
saying. We
ahead,
should have done
okay,
some of
and
it
also
yesterday.
do it now
Yep.
and not make any deals at all with the people who have their money sitting overseas. Don't make any deals at all. If they don't
We're
want
not
to
making deals. They got to bring
participate,
it back. Yeah.
well, how are you going to force them to bring it back if they don't want to bring it back?
Right.
In other
So,
words,
yeah.
what the proposals have been so far is don't force them to bring it back. Okay, give them tax incentives to bring it back. In other words, give away part of the taxes they owe
Yeah, that
for
is
the
the fundamental
favor
problem.
of having them actually bring them
Yeah,
back.
because we did this before. We
Well, we
did this
don't
back
bring it.
in '04, right? '04, '06, we did
Okay,
this.
okay.
We
So basically,
repatriated
what I
money, and
say is
they gave themselves bonuses at
we
the end of it.
start investing now and start building up this economy now and get it booming now. And if they want to participate by bringing the tax money back, then they'll have to pay their fair share of taxes on it. If they don't want to participate, then they won't make any more money because they just leave it sitting over there.
Right, exactly. So this is
So
talking
why should we
about, yeah.
worry?
So paying back, so they would not have future tax incentives if they did not ultimately comply with this, and they'd have to pay back any taxes, benefits that they've received, and rebates they've received in the past. Verizon paid zero in federal income taxes
Yes, I
over
know.
several years, right?
I
And
know. It's
and their headquarters is right in our district. In fact, they got a $500 million rebate from us.
right,
Uh,
right,
and
right.
and that, who does that money belong to?
Yeah,
It
because
belongs to
we
us,
have
and it
tax
always belonged to us.
incentives
So
in
yeah,
our tax laws from which they would benefit if they move their businesses outside the country. I mean, we
exactly.
set it up that way.
Yeah, yeah. And we need to put an end to that. And we need justice ultimately. If
And we
I
need
don't pay my taxes,
representatives who will support that and who will support it all the way down the line. And you're telling me that you will.
That's
Okay, and that's
that's why we're
wonderful.
here.
But all I want to hear is that you won't wait for us to invest the $1.4 trillion with federal money for them to bring back their investments.
Yep. And for the third time, making it loud and clear, we should have invested in our economy yesterday. We should have transitioned to 100% renewables yesterday. We don't have to wait, and we should have been waiting for any Paris Agreement. We should have done it yesterday. But what we are talking about now is getting the right people in office. Glad to be endorsed by groups like Brand New Congress and Justice Democrats, people who will make those type of things happen, people who are in your communities who share that vision, no matter if they have endorsements or none whatsoever. You know where they stand on the issues. We need a revolution in this country. People who are going to actually fight for this, not just empty promises, just blowing wind when they speak, giving complete platitudes. And we are making that commitment to talk about the issues and provide actual policy for that. So that is what this conversation is about tonight.
Okay, so here's something new that I don't think you've heard before. Okay, it's on the third panel there. And what I'm going to do is to make the third panel solo. Okay, and then you'll better be able to see the text on here.
Okay.
This is language that can be placed in any appropriations bill or CR bill that goes through the Congress. And these are two sentences, basically. One simple clause, essentially boilerplate, okay, at the end, okay, of every appropriations bill. And what the first sentence says is, when that appropriations bill gets passed, the Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account at the New York Federal Reserve Bank, because that's where it is, with the addition to its reserve balance necessary to spend the appropriation. So that's the first sentence. In other words, it gives the Treasury the money up front at the point of passage of the appropriation to do the spending, to implement it. It leaves open the question about whether the spending will be deficit spending or won't be deficit spending. That question will be settled in a later tax bill. Okay, but what such an appropriations bill would be about would be just the spending that we need for the economic and social programs that we favor, that we think the people need, that we think are good for the public purpose. Okay? And then what the second sentence says is that the Federal Reserve is also directed to fill the Treasury spending account with the additions to the reserve balances necessary to repay all outstanding debt instruments, including the principal and the interest on the debt, as these payments fall due for the fiscal year of the appropriation. So you get the meaning of this. It means that the money would be placed in the Treasury spending account to pay down the debt, leaving aside the question of taxation, okay, or bond financing, okay, or any of that stuff. The debt would be paid down gradually through time as it falls due by making a clause like this, basically a boilerplate clause, okay, in all of the appropriations bills. If this were passed and included in an appropriations bill, then within 6 months, the public would see that the public debt problem is a faux problem. That was never a real problem because the federal government could easily have arranged for paying down and paying off the the public debt. And the reason why the public would be able to see this is because the press would be able to report that the size of our public debt fell by roughly $4 trillion in 6 months, because a large proportion of our public debt is actually short-term debt, maybe 3-month debt or 6-month debt, okay, or that kind of period on the debt. So within 6 months, a large portion of it would be paid down, and that would be there for everybody to see that this language was taking away the federal debt. So it would no longer be a political issue. You would not face opposition from the Peterson Foundation and from the other fiscal responsibility hawksters in the DC area. Now, the real fiscal responsibility, in any case, is spending for the public purpose. It's not spending to reduce the debt or spending to reduce the deficit or some kind of artifact statistically that does not relate to the real lives, okay, of the people, okay. But this would take the political issue of the debt off the table. It was always a false financial issue, okay, at least since we got off the gold standard, okay. But now it would be a political issue that would quickly disappear off the table if you put this language into bills. Okay, now, you won't hear this proposal from the Justice Democrats. They're totally unaware of it, okay? And since Junk is a neoliberal, he probably won't even care for this, okay? Because he wants to pay down the debt ultimately by running surpluses, which means he wants to kill the economy, but he doesn't realize it, okay? But anyway, Justice Democrats aside, this is something I think you ought to study as a possibility when you get to Congress. And I'm assuming that you will get to Congress, that this time you will win. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing this. Would love to share it. You know where to reach me. Send it to me, and my policy team would be happy to discuss. And when we get to Congress, let's have a solid, real conversation about this. We need innovative ideas. We need to rethink the way that we've been doing things. Clearly, it's not resorting to anything positive. And as you suggest, well, as you say, which is true, we're pandering to the right as they politicize.
Okay, well, I'll be happy to send you the language, and I'll send you some blog posts,
awesome.
Okay, and also some other live streams on this. Okay, and I hope this helps you when you get to Congress, and I hope, knowing that this is a possibility, okay, and that this is here. Also helps you in your campaign, because if you think on this for a little while, then you will realize that without any danger to ourselves economically, we can have the kind of deficit spending that we need to always maintain a full employment economy. You may or may not actually realize that, but the size of the deficits that we've had after the crash, even at their height, have been far too small to compensate for the leakages in our demand due to our trade deficit and due to savings. Mm. Okay, the deficit spending by the government has not been high enough to compensate for those leakages in demand. the policies, okay, of Obama, which after the initial stimulus were to reduce the deficit, okay, as quickly as he could, actually ran counter to the need for a recovery, okay, a rapid recovery.
Right.
Okay. The constant efforts of the Republicans, when they don't want to cut taxes for the rich, to keep other spending small, also leave us, okay, with deficits that are too small to compensate for the leakages. But with a clause like this, which takes the debt issue off the table and finances, the deficits without using further Treasury issue debt instruments, that gives you the freedom to do the kind of deficit spending that we really need to face our problems. You've advocated strongly for the environment, okay, and creating an economy that would be fossil fuel free by 2035.
Right.
That's going to take money. And I don't know if Tulsi Gabbard's bill actually provides that money, okay, or even envisions it. On the other hand, if you figure that the savings desires, okay, of people per year are going to amount to 6% of our GDP, and that our desires, okay, for imports are going to amount to a trade deficit of 6% of GDP. Those two things total roughly 12%, okay, of GDP.
Mm.
If you get out your calculator, okay, and you compute what 12% of a $20 trillion GDP is, then you see that we need $2.4 trillion if we were to run a full employment type of deficit.
Yep. And you get that right there by switching to single payer.
If you want to deficit spend the whole single payer program, okay, however, the single payer program would also be deflationary in certain respects, because when you think through the financing of a single payer program, we spend roughly $3.4 trillion, okay, on healthcare right now.
Right.
Every dollar of that comes out of private sector pockets. The reason why is there's no government deficit spending for our healthcare programs right now. Either our money goes to the government in taxes, okay, or it goes to the insurance companies in the form of the premiums, or it goes for the co-pays and the deductibles. But one way or another, it all comes out of our pockets.
Absolutely. Yep.
True?
Yep.
Okay. So it's calculated by some people that a good single payer program like 676 might actually result in reducing our healthcare expenditures from $3.4 trillion a year to $1.7 trillion a year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if that happens, okay, then that means that there'll be $1.7 trillion a year that will be back in the pockets of people and won't be going to the government and won't be going to insurance companies. Now, I don't think that's going to be deflationary, but there are some people who are afraid that's going to be deflationary because we won't actually be spending the other 1.7 trillion anymore. Okay, so they theorize that might be deflationary. Now, as I say, I don't think it's going to be deflationary because there have been some econometric studies that show that if we did something like 676, it would produce a net of 2.5 million new jobs for the economy. So I don't think that's going to be deflationary. Okay, but if it were, then there would be an argument for deficit spending, at least some of that. But even if we deficit spent the whole 1.7 trillion, we'd still have room. We'd still have to do more deficit spending to hit that target of $2.4 trillion. So my point is, if we look at that figure for deficit spending, we see there's a lot of room for spending on green jobs and our efforts to green our system and on efforts to get to Tulsi's target of 2035 and maybe get there even earlier.
Right.
But it's going to involve federal involvement.
Exactly. Yep.
And Tulsi hasn't provided for much of that. Has she? I mean, in terms of dollars.
Right.
And how much federal funding has she actually provided in her bill for it?
Yeah, and I don't think those details are necessarily there. And again, I am not a Jeffrey Sachs. I'm not a macroeconomist. I'm a social worker. But I understand these concepts enough. I study socioeconomic development, and I'm not going to presume to know the details of anything. It is a fairly new bill, and the nature of these bills, once you put forward the idea, you put forward the grand vision, and we need serious people like yourself to really be at the table with us in Congress to discuss these details. And I think that these things are doable. It must be done. We see China, we see Germany, we see Japan and India already making steps towards this in greening their economies, and we're falling behind. And so it's a Congress question.
Okay, but to spend the kind of money China is now spending, we can't afford to have the debt hawks sitting on our back talking to us about how high the national debt, is rising, and that it's now rising to $70,000 for every one of you, $80,000 for every one of you, $100,000 for every one of you. Well, first, it's not for every one of us anyway, because it's the government's debt. It's not our debt.
Yeah.
And the debt doesn't have to be paid off by taxes. Okay, the government has a lot of other ways to pay off the debt.
Okay? It's the framing.
All debts must be paid off under the Constitution. According to the 14th Amendment, the federal government has to pay off all its bills. It isn't able to default and still be within the Constitution. Okay, that's the 14th Amendment, Section 3, if I recall correctly, has that prohibition in it, in case you're curious. Okay, so the point being, we will need money for the environment. We will need it for healthcare. We will need it for a job guarantee program, which will probably start off costing $750 billion a year. But once the economy is jacked up by it, that expense will probably fall to $250 billion a year. But still, we have large programs to pay for, a long way to go to give people the good life that we want them to have, and to solve the environmental climate crisis. We must solve it. We have no option. It's a life and death crisis for us. I completely agree with you on that. But so we can't have this debt problem as a political problem held over the heads of our congresspeople when they're trying to pass the kinds of bills we need. Congresspeople like yourself can't be worried that some people down on 14th and Pennsylvania, or whatever it is, 2 blocks away from the White House, are going there and screaming day after day, look at how big the debt is, or running down to Congress and testifying to Congress, look, we all owe $80,000. I mean, I'm telling you, every spring you get that from the Peterson Foundation and the Peterson Network, in D.C. They parade these witnesses before Congress to talk about the evils of the debt and the impending insolvency of Social Security. And you can't have that on your back anymore. That's
Right.
why you need this clause.
There you go.
If you really want to get your stuff done,
and look, it's a complete failure of Democrats and people on the left to really frame these issues and discuss it in a rational and realistic sense. Republicans have clearly won the framing war at this point in our discussions, in our politics. And I think in all reality, nobody's says anything about military spending. We're giving Trump $165 billion over 2 years, more than what he asked. Democrats and Republicans work together to make that happen, and nobody's discussing it on the mainstream media. There's not politicians, mainstream corporatists, Democrats talking about establishment, or Republicans talking about it. I mean, the fact of the matter, these discussions are not happening outside of us here and a few of us that are out there. And when we get to Congress,
and I take it you would change that.
Exactly, and that is why we are fighting to get there, to begin those conversations.
Would you reauthorize the AUMF, the authorization for the use of
military force?
Yeah, military force. Yeah.
I think it should be in the hands of Congress. A president shouldn't unilaterally decide on warfare. It should be the people who have the information. We see how it's been misused year after year. They're trying to manufacture consent for war, whether it's North Korea, Russia, potentially Iran and Pakistan.
So are you saying that you would be in favor of actually repealing the AUMF?
Yes.
Okay, so would I. And I think so would most of the people who are watching you here. Okay, but there are many other people in the country who would not be in favor of that.
They want the commander-in-chief, they call him that for that very reason, right? So I think the fundamental thing is we need to understand that if you want to be a true patriot, take care of the homeless people, take care of those vets, prevent those suicides, make sure you take care of your children so they're strong for the next generation. That's what being a patriot.
And we also have to understand, okay, that according to the Constitution, even though the president is the commander in chief, it's not the president who declares war.
Right.
It's not the president who funds war. Those powers are left in the hands of the Congress, and Congress has not been exercising those powers. It's been giving them away to the executive. And that has to change if we want our democracy back.
Exactly. And that is what exactly we're fighting to make people realize. Like, the fundamental failure is in America, perhaps anywhere, we have short-term memories. What happened, the Iraq invasion, outfall pretexts. And so the fact that we have given up so much, and it's not so much the president, he's just a puppet to the military industrial complex. He does what they say, or there's the long-standing joke that they say when you get to the White House, they say, oh, that was some great language there. And they sit you down and show you a video of JFK being assassinated, a gunshot from being fired from an angle nobody else has seen. That's at least they joke about that, right? So, I mean, that's the fact that every president either goes to war since Carter, or maintains a war or expands warfare. And if we're not having these discussions, we can't expect the mainstream media, MSNBC, who is, at the feet of General Electric, to have these discussions. We, the people, must have those discussions. And I'm glad to be a part of that movement, at least what is left of it, that anti-war movement that brewed up during the Vietnam War into the Iraq War. That, in a way, got Barack Obama to win over a Hillary Clinton or a John McCain, because he called it out. That got Donald Trump elected for calling George Bush stupid in front of Jeff Bush. So the American people, we clearly do not want to be an interventionist nation. We know we need to invest at home, and these are the issues we want to bring to the forefront. And I think we need a strong coalition of all of us, no matter where you fall. Whether you call yourself progressive, whether you call yourself Democrat, Green, whatever it is, whatever tribe you want to belong to, I think we need to coalesce. We need that coalition, that anti-war movement to come back and be that loud voice so all of America sees.
Okay, so big money in politics.
Where do you want to begin? We, of course, I'll get the corny stuff out of the way. We want to overturn Citizens United. We need a constitutional amendment. We got to keep in mind one thing. Everybody who wants to get money out of politics really doesn't want to get money out of politics. We got to be careful of front groups like End Citizens United. I support a strong organization called Move to Amend, which has an actual constitutional amendment that makes it clear that human beings are persons and not corporations, and that money is not speech. That clearly lays it out. Move to Amend does that, and Citizens United really doesn't. They just raise money for establishmentarians. But I think we need to address the fundamental problems.
I certainly agree with the Move to Amend approach to this, and I certainly agree with the idea of having such an amendment.
Yeah.
But I would raise the point that if you're going to pass such an amendment, probably going to take you a minimum of 7 years from now to get it through. It might be as long.
And that is why. And that is why we need to go bypass, I'd say, having to deal with overturning Citizens United.
And how do we do that?
Passing the American Anti-Corruption Act, which was put forward and created by Represent Us, which does three basic things: stops political bribery, ends secret money, and restores the voter's voice, fixes our broken elections. 5 municipalities right here in the state of New Jersey have passed it as resolutions. Several counties and municipalities have done the same. In fact, South Dakota in 2016, through a ballot initiative, a referendum on the ballot, passed it with over 50% of the vote. The state Senate, along with the governor's office, with the funding of the Koch brothers, repealed it. This is what the people wanted, and then they called a state of an emergency, and the state Senate, along with the governor's office, repealed the American Anti-Corruption Act, which did basically those three things tailored for the needs of South Dakota, which was ranked the fourth most corrupt state in the nation. So, this is
so what happens if lawsuits by the Koch brothers and others who stand to gain, but once again get to the Supreme Court and overturn all these efforts to circumvent the CU on the same grounds that that money is speech and that campaign contributions are a form, of speech, that corporations are persons entitled but to free speech. What I'm saying is the solution you're suggesting still doesn't solve the problem.
Mm-hmm. So cut the role of money. That's what we're trying to get to here is cut the role of money in politics to begin with, and make it completely transparent. So when you talk about stopping political bribery, there's a fundamental problem with lobbyists. And of course, we've taken the pledge for zero corporate PAC money. A lot of others have said we don't want corporate PAC money, which may mean something that, on your FEC filings, it doesn't show up. I mean, there's other ways they could package money and give it to you through fundraisers and whatnot. But a lobbyist, we need to clearly define lobby. And we're not doing that right now. There's plenty of people, Michael Flynn's just the tip of the iceberg. Like, who is a lobbyist and what do they do? We need to also address the fact of the revolving door. Often being in Congress, being in the House of Representatives or the Senate, 50% of senators end up becoming lobbyists, as if serving in Congress is just an internship for your real job of being a lobbyist that pays 10, 20 times more than what you made serving in as a publicly elected official in federal office. So, a lobbyist also does an interesting thing where they can't take me out to lunch and buy me my favorite steak, but they could throw $1 million fundraiser, bundle a bunch of money together with their millionaire friends, and make sure that steak is there as they're talking to my
Right.
staff,
Yeah, they
right?
can have your favorite steak as an appetizer or something.
Yes, exactly. And this is the fundamental loopholes in the system we must close. We need to do something like this. We need to, address super PACs exist, but there were PACs before that. There were these 501c4 social welfare organizations, and here again is where the right, the Republicans, the conservatives have won the framing wars. They got organizations like Americans for Progress, in the same way many of these terroristic groups in places like Africa and throughout the world call themselves the People's Liberation Front or something like that. So they call it the
Yes.
Americans for Progress, and whatnot. But it's really just a front organization that has nothing to do for progress or for Americans. But they funnel
You're
money,
right.
unlimited
And
money.
a lot of the problem with that, which currently exists, is simply that the federal government doesn't enforce the letter of the law. This actually goes back to the Eisenhower administration.
Yep.
In 1958, they issued a ruling which said that as long as such an organization spends less than 50% of what it spends on activities that are political, that's still okay. They can claim the tax exemption. Okay. And then that got actually watered down further by succeeding administrations, which basically let these so-called charitable types of organizations, social value types of organizations, basically skate and spend as much as 90% on those kinds of activities, which is a clear violation of the law. It's just the IRS not having the political gumption to enforce the law on these groups, because the outcry would be so great, and particularly in the case of the church groups or the those groups that are related to churches in some way, that are subsidiaries, of churches.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And that's what this act is ultimately doing, enforcing the rules, making sure that there's accountability and transparency.
Okay, but I put to you again that even though those things would help, they don't really get around the threat posed by a Supreme Court that could rule that those things are unconstitutional. That any laws having to do with campaign financing are violations of the free speech rights of those who are doing the financing. Okay, so in this connection, I want to call your attention to Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution, which has a clause, one sentence clause in it. It's actually a phrase. It's called the Exceptions Clause to the Constitution. And in the Exceptions Clause, the founders gave the power to the Congress to determine the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court and to limit the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court in legislation they passed. In other words, you could pass campaign finance laws and prohibit the Supreme Court using the authority in the Exceptions Clause from reviewing your law for constitutionality, or for that matter, for anything else. So my question to you is, would you use that power, which is explicit in the Constitution? It's not an implied power. It was written in by the framers as one of the checks that could be exercised against a Supreme Court that had gone wild, as this Supreme Court certainly has. would you be willing to use Article 3, Section 2 in conjunction with the other laws that you want to pass to get money out of politics?
It's as if the founding fathers suspected something like this would happen
Well, of
some
course they
100
did.
years later,
Of
right?
course they
So
did.
absolutely.
More, it's actually, what is it now? More than 200 years later, isn't it?
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
1789, so it's
yeah.
230 years later almost. So, yeah, they did anticipate it. For the most part, they hated corporations.
Right, right. They
Okay.
served a certain function back in those days, and they dissolved. So
Yes, and they certainly didn't intend that corporations would ever be considered to be people,
indeed.
or persons. They knew the concept of a corporation, and the Constitution probably allows for corporations to be formed, but it in no way considers them as people. That's been a matter of interpretation by this Supreme Court beginning in 1976. Okay,
Thanks to Lewis
gradually
Powell. Yeah.
extending. Yes, Lewis Powell, right. Okay, but in any case, would you use Article 3, Section 2? And the reason why I suggest that is if you use it and the Supreme Court is not allowed but to review campaign finance laws, you could also reauthorize all the campaign finance laws that the court previously found to be unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they would instantly become law. But once again, from day one, as soon as you passed that particular clause.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because it means lawyers couldn't go to the Supreme Court to say that what you're doing, okay, it's unconstitutional, or that what you had done was unconstitutional.
Right.
So that provides the time we need to get the amendment actually through and to totally secure the situation, or as near to totally secure as we possibly can anyway, okay, the situation. And it also provides the time to change the composition of the Supreme Court. It would really take a change of only one vote to have the Supreme Court go a different way on CU, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But, okay, so
it
would give time for one of those two things to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's something definitely to explore. I, as someone who's a social worker who does community organizing, I come from the approach, and definitely that is something that, with the backing of the Constitution, something that necessarily, if it could be done, should be done. But I come from an approach of cultural shift and change, and putting an end to any reliance on money in campaign spirit. Yeah, you need money to get some ads out and stuff like that. But in an ideal democracy, the average voter, the average person would be engaged where they know who your candidates are, who your elected officials are, and what they're saying when they talk about the issues. And they could tell where you fall on the political spectrum as well. And I'd like to see a day, every revolution was not fought. Revolutions were not fought with, field directors and whatnot making $300,000 and then cashing out at the end of the day, whether you win or lose or whatnot. So revolutions are run with people who are intrinsically motivated, who want to get involved with campaigns and who are interested in what the future of their nation and communities look like. And so I'd like to get to that point. And I think this bill kind of gets there. It enables people to think about being involved in their politics on that level. The part where it fixes our broken elections, that third part, aside from stopping political bribery, ending the secret money, you want to fix our broken elections with the basic stuff of open registration, same-day registration, open primaries, and plenty of other good stuff, potential ranked choice voting, democracy credits, and things like that as contributions. That enables people to become more involved in their democracy. And I think that promotes a cultural shift. and the way people think about it. And that enables, I think, more sustainable solutions than laws on the books ever could. So that is the approach I take. And without a doubt, I don't doubt your approach.
And with that particular approach, I mean, I completely agree on that approach. Okay. What I'm saying is, while you implement it, you also need to have some campaign finance laws implemented that can withstand a review by the Supreme Court. And there's no better way than to prevent a review by the Supreme Court than to remove the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court from the particular law in question. And since the power to do that is in the Constitution, I don't see why a progressive Congress would fail to do that in the case of the Supreme Court that we have right now, which has been making outlandish decisions since the election of 2000. That was the first really outlandish decision. Okay. But then they just kept on doing it, right up to the present.
Okay. That was what they get away with, yes.
Okay, so, and just a final thought on that. In the ideal world, where we also had the job guarantee program that I spoke of before, but political participation might be a job that would be guaranteed within the job guarantee program. Certainly, civic participation is a good for a democracy. And I don't see why it ought to be a good that is restricted to people who can afford to take the time off to participate in politics. Mm-hmm. I think politics should be open to poorer people too, okay, right. Or to middle class people.
The size of your bank account shouldn't determine whether you could run for office and serve your community.
Whether you could run for office. And one way to boost this and to create the opportunity to do this is to have this be one of the jobs that would be funded under the job guarantee. Okay, and whether it would be or would not be, okay, and whether art would be or would be something funded, okay, or whether music would be, okay, or literature. All these could be funded within a job guarantee program as long as the local communities want such things done. So that's just right. Something to keep in mind in thinking about the job guarantee program and the kind of transformation to our lives it could create. Okay, gender equality. Okay, I guess that's really pretty simple for us to deal with. We are for it in every sense of the word, right?
Absolutely. You got it. 100%.
We are strongly for it. And we're strongly for ending discrimination for LGBTQ IA folks and for women of color and for all minorities. Okay.
Absolutely. Not even a question. Yes.
Not even a question. I didn't think there was. Okay. And there
I became a social worker for a reason. So.
Yeah. Okay, gun safety. So where do you stand on gun safety?
Yeah. Of course, we need to do the common sense stuff of universal background checks, every gun, every single time, limit magazine capacities, assault weapons ban, I think is in order. Nobody needs an AR-15. You don't go hunting with that gun. That gun has one function, and it is to kill people. But also, and here I also like to take a cultural approach, as well as a similar legal type of approach. But so let me start with the legal part. There's an interesting proposal that Tom Hartman puts forward with regards to treating guns like cars. Get insurance, get liability insurance. when there's a mass shooting or an incident of gun violence, who pays for it? Society does, But if you hit somebody with your car on purpose or by accident, there's insurance that takes care of it. Also,
Yes.
registering your gun, getting a title for a gun, keeping track of that, taking a written test, taking a firing test, all that in that process. So that's kind of the legal aspect of it. Treat guns in the same way we treat cars, and then you won't have all these people who stockpile weapons as if zombies are going to take over tomorrow and they're going to have to defend the world from aliens or whatnot. But the second part, again, it's cultural for me. I think that's more sustainable. The quote unquote, how do you change hearts and minds towards things in a very ingrained society? And in all honesty, when people on the left talk about, hunting and things like that, when it comes to the Second Amendment, folks on the right know what it is. And it has to do with racism. It has to do with Second Amendment was based on killing Native Americans, fending them off your land in places like New England, and maintaining your slave patrols in the South. And so we need to have a serious, honest conversation about that. I think also the way we assuage the need for a gun is to ensure what we put forward in our people's platform. You give people a living wage. You give people health care. They don't got to worry about putting food on their table. They don't have to worry about the next time that they're sick or something happens or their spouse gets cancer or a child gets cancer. How are they going to pay for it should not be a question. You assuage those worries, a worry-free healthcare system with putting food on the table, then it's not going to matter if my neighbor who's Muslim or Mexican or whoever has a bit more than I do. I am taking care of my own needs, that I feel safe, that I'm a woman and I could go out jogging in the summer. And I don't have to be fully bundled up and worry about men, and I don't have to carry a gun with me as I go out jogging at night, because people are not going to rob me, or they're less likely to do that when you have a level of education, when you have a level of economic security. And I think with that, over a generation, we could assuage the desire and need for a gun in America.
Yes, I think so too. It may even take far less than a generation. I know in Australia, okay, it took a lot less time than a generation to have that happen.
That's the basic. I think there's cultural differences too. That's what I'm pointing out to. The assault weapons ban. Yeah, you do it. You do it. Even when we had the assault weapons ban, we had Columbine, right? Because there's a culture there. And again, that's why I point out we need to have an honest conversation about what is the context of the Second Amendment.
Yes,
and it goes back again to racism, and we need to really talk about that. But again, I think because it's for many people culturally ingrained, and there's arguments people make about protection, safety, sportsmanship, as well as using a gun or needing a gun for hunting. These conversations in and of themselves have their place, and we need to be able to differentiate where that is, where a conversation about sportsmanship or hunting is different from using a gun for racist purposes or having a gun for racist purposes.
True, absolutely true. Okay, you're for guaranteeing fully funded public college, also universities and trade schools.
Yep, like we already had in this country.
Like we used to have in the cities in this country, you mean?
Yep. And even through Abraham Lincoln's land-grant colleges throughout the nation, tuition-free, invest in people. They worked the land. It was obviously for a specific group of people, blacks and people of color were disproportionately disabled from accessing. Excluded from accessing much of that stuff, including the GI Bill. But we saw where it worked. The great vision of Benjamin Franklin and people who founded this nation was access to free education. And in this era, it's not sufficient to just have a high school diploma. You need more education to have a strong economy. Not only do you protect democracy through education, you have a strong economy through an education. And as we transition to perhaps the third industrial revolution at this point, investment in clean energy and smart technology, we need the right workforce and a strong workforce prepared for that. We did it with the City College, or what is City University now, the UCL, University of California systems. We could do it again.
Yes, we can. Okay, but are you for fully funded education at all levels, from pre-kindergarten up through graduate school?
Yep. Yes, indeed. I come from a state in India. I was born in Kerala. My uncle has his master's degree. The only thing they paid for was an entrance fee and their books. And in Kerala, if you were poor and you couldn't afford those things, the government took care of you. It's not a wealthy state. It's a middle income state, and it's a very small state. But we could ensure that for our people. Yeah. And we have 100% literacy. And my grandparents, who didn't study past 8th and 10th grade, my grandmother, grandfather, respectively, they know how to read and write English. They can't keep up. I speak too fast for them, but they know those things because we invested heavily in education and prepared them to raise their children in a wonderful way. And now their grandson's running for U.S. Congress. So.
Fantastic. Okay, so you'd be for the federal government actually paying for this, right?
Yes.
For federal grants, but going to state and local governments, okay, in order to ensure that education was free to all,
right,
at every level. Right?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, and as part of ending gender discrimination, you want to guarantee equal pay for equal work.
Right.
As well. Okay, I wanted to point that out because I don't know if we specifically mentioned it.
Yeah. And I think, as a social worker in fields dominated by women, nursing, social work, we tend to also not be compensated fairly for the work that we're doing in fields that are dominated by men often, even in construction. You got a master's degree or a PhD in social work, and someone with a high school diploma, a typical white male, is paid more than what you are. I think everybody should be able to live, right?
That's ridiculous.
But it's the value of women and the work that we do, even teachers. Another example right there. So.
Okay, so that kind of gets into other issues. What about teachers' salaries? They're notoriously inadequate in the United States compared to other countries.
Yeah, compared to places like South Korea and,
also Finland.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Where the salaries of a teacher are as high as the salary of an engineer, or the salary of a doctor.
Yep. We have a nation that's drifted from valuing education, not valuing intellectualism in our nation. Ultimately, it is to destroy the unions and educating the next generation and having them prepared. There's people in power who prefer individuals who are ignorant and will do as they say instead of thinking for themselves. And that is why we're teaching evolution besides creationism.
Okay, so basically, what would you do to raise teacher salaries in schools across the country?
Teachers have to fight for the wages that they want. We saw a victory in places like West Virginia, and in those places, teachers cannot go on strike. There's a simple thing we need to do. In any revolution, power doesn't concede anything. You must take power. Power concedes nothing except to fear. And what we saw in West Virginia this past week, what we've been seeing for the past 2.5 weeks, in fact, is them fighting back and taking what's exactly there. So if teachers, and I can't say there's an exact wage that they should be earning, but what they want, they know better than I do. They're teachers. I could speak as far as social workers. Whatever those teachers are making, we deserve that much as well. And so we need to fight for that as people. Yeah,
certainly. Okay, but it still puts the burden of the fight solely on the teachers themselves. Shouldn't the federal government stand ready to help the state and local governments in raising the salaries of the teachers?
Yep, absolutely. Yep, you need a progressive and alert federal government, Congress,
We
to
used
be
to
able to
have
be beside them.
programs in the federal government for revenue sharing. Okay, those were very popular during the Nixon administration, the Carter administration, and the Ford administration. Okay, in those times, they were basically phased out by the Reagan administration, with the feds claiming poverty, that they didn't have the money, to actually do the revenue sharing any longer. But to bring up the boilerplate clause that I spoke about again, of course, this creates a situation where it would be up to Congress, and there would be no barrier for Congress to actually create that money. So the question is, would Congress actually do that?
If you elect people like myself, without a doubt, everybody has a seat at the table for that discussion to begin.
Okay, you also are in favor of ending the private prison industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. In the same way we treat education, or the way we should be treating healthcare, way too many people, and disproportionately people of color, blacks in this society. It is a system which sets them up for failure for a few people to profit. And they continue to do that over and over. Our prisons, our detention centers, they just lock up people, basically enslave them, use them for free labor. We need to put an end to that. We need to reinvest in people. We need to make sure we got jobs, we got treatment programs to address addiction issues, and make sure that when they go back out, whether it's to the same people, places, and things, that we could cut the recidivism rate, that they have opportunities in those communities. Again, all the stuff that we do, we can't do it in a compartmentalized, isolated way. We
That's
need
right.
to be, we need to do many of these things in the same way the New Deal was rolled out. It needs to be a program. It needs to be a packaged initiative.
Yes, because these different things are related to each other.
Yep.
There's the job guarantee is related to transitioning to a different energy platform,
Right.
and transitioning to handling the climate crisis. It's also related to the healthcare system, simply because if we did not pass a Medicare for All bill, then we would have to provide substantially that kind of fringe benefit within the job guarantee program, for example. Um, okay, so there are a number of these different planks which are interrelated, and they're not simply separate. There's one issue on your platform that we haven't discussed yet, and then one final issue, okay, which I want to discuss. And that issue is net neutrality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the one, okay, that's on by your platform. So, what would you do to secure net neutrality?
Mm-hmm. I think what needs to ultimately be done is pass a law that clearly states net neutrality, that it protects people's access. The fundamental thing I think in the US is ultimately greed. And if we compare our access to internet and the quality of our internet services and the amount we're ultimately paying, if we look at Europe, where you got a $20 bill per month and you got faster internet uh, than we do here in the States. Uh, it may come down to ultimately local municipal internets. If there's continuous greed by big telecom, also the fact that we no longer have a competitive market for internet services. When's the last time we heard of internet startup? You don't. And here in our 7th district, where we are home to big telecom, I mentioned Verizon it has its headquarters right here in our district. How come there isn't, in the same way, when you got a brewery, you got microbreweries that pop up here and there, right? We need to enable our young folks to be able to be entrepreneurs and leaders. I remember when the internet first started, who heard of net zero? It's not there anymore. The bigger fish come out and eat them up. So we need to enable fair and equal competition. That I think that will reduce pricing. I also think we need to explore access to municipal internet. It's proven faster, affordable for the people in those communities, and it's become a revenue stream for several cities or few cities throughout our nation.
Yes, it has. Okay, and the last issue, that I want to discuss, which I don't think that you really are aware of, but I'll bring up the chart again. You'll notice in this language that there's no funding of federal spending in this language through tax revenues or through bond revenues. In other words, the way the funding happens here is that Congress orders the Fed to place the money the Treasury needs to spend right in the Treasury account. Okay, and also the additional money that it needs to spend to repay the federal debt that falls due. So one can clearly see with this language that the taxes do not fund spending, and that also bond revenues do not fund spending. They certainly would not do that if this kind of language was in congressional bills. It would be what the framers intended, that spending would be funded by Congress creating the money. What this language actually provides is for Congress to appropriate the money and then to order its creature, the Federal Reserve, to produce it, just as Congress itself at one time used to actually produce the money for the Treasury to spend.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that hasn't been for a long time now, but at one time, that was the case. So this language is really a return to that, in one sense. But what's not realized, but still what is actually true, is that even today, taxes do not fund spending, and neither do bond revenues fund spending. And I'll explain why this is true. First of all, there can be no bond sales and there can be no tax revenues unless the federal government has spent money into the economy first. So at some point in the history of the United States, to be able to pay taxes using government money, which is the only form in which taxes can be paid, there has to be government money out in the private economy first. Okay, so that's one argument for saying what actually funds the future spending is previous money created by the government. Okay, but that's an argument which takes monetary circulation as kind of a giant circuit in which the first step in the circuit is the creation of money by the federal government. Okay. The other argument for why taxes do not fund spending, and bond revenues do not fund spending, goes something like the following way. The way the banking system operates, and in particular the Federal Reserve, is that when the Treasury Department actually collects the taxes and places the taxes for deposit in its spending account, and also when it sells bonds, and the Federal Reserve is used as the auctioneer for the bonds and for the collection, of the money people pay, to buy bonds, or corporations pay, or foreign nations pay to buy the Treasury securities. The first thing the Federal Reserve does before it creates any new reserves for the Treasury spending account is to destroy the old reserves. In other words, the act of actually buying debt instruments or paying taxes removes money from the private economy. And it's the Fed's role to drain that money out of the accounts, the private accounts. The money that is then placed in the Treasury spending account is actually new reserves that are created by the Fed because it owes the Treasury now some reserves that it has to create. But the point is, the old money is destroyed. It's destroyed in the reserve accounts of the banks, whose accounts are sitting at the Fed. And then entirely new, high-powered government money. In other words, the money that is worth the most, in the economy we have today, in other words, that is accepted everywhere, is the new money which the Federal Reserve, using the authority of Congress, creates within the Treasury spending account. So the reason why I say that taxes do not fund spending is simply, how can the tax money fund the spending when that money never actually hits the Treasury spending account, but is destroyed by the Federal Reserve before it actually hits the Treasury spending account? So now I'm talking about the banking operations, the actual reality of marking down the private accounts and going ahead and marking up the Treasury spending account. Now, certainly taxes play a role in that, and bond sales play a role in that, but they don't actually do the funding. The funding moves in a straight line from the appropriations by Congress to the Federal Reserve actually placing new money into the Treasury account. And what the bond operations are about, and what Treasury spending is about, what the Treasury taxing is about, is actually draining money out of the economy to make room for the new federal spending. So two separate functions, one the spending function, the other the draining function, which conceptually need to be seen as separate functions of the monetary system. So I wanted you to hear that argument simply because it's helpful to keep in mind that even right now, taxes do not actually fund federal spending. It's really the authority of Congress that does, and the actions of the Congress.
Okay.
And that relates to the language, which I've been suggesting here for the following reason. Using the boilerplate language that I was suggesting, Congress would be passing a spending bill or bills, but it wouldn't be providing for any draining of the economy to make room for that spending. It would need separate taxing bills, in order to do that. But this relates to the following issue. Right now, Congress operates under the pay-go system. In other words, okay, it's mandated as congressional procedures, and one of the leading people involved in maintaining those procedures and suggesting them in the first place was actually Nancy Pelosi. But of course, Paul Ryan completely agrees with her concerning this, is that they should be following a pay-go system so that all the programs are paid for in the same bill by both spending and taxing in the same bill, which of course then over the long term does the most that can be done towards getting to a very low deficit and getting towards a budget surplus. The only problem is at the federal level, the government creates its own money, and it doesn't have to run a budget surplus. And the only condition on which it should run a budget deficit, a surplus, okay, a budget surplus, is if its trade deficit turned into a really big trade surplus, so money was coming back from overseas, then it might make sense to run a budget surplus as a hedge against inflation. But in the circumstances we have now and for the foreseeable future, it never makes sense to run a low deficit or a budget surplus, because when you do, you actually drain net financial assets out of the private economy. Bill Clinton did that for 4 years, and the Democrats are still celebrating it. It created a recession from 2000 to 2002, and the Democrats never noticed that.
Yes.
Somehow. I don't know why. It also set the stage for the crash of 2007, 2008.
Right.
Okay, because the only way we got out of the recession of 2000, 2002 was basically money for the war, essentially military Keynesianism, and the housing boom, which was fueled by a bubble blown by the private banks and the Federal Reserve. When that bubble burst, it caused the great financial crash. Okay, the stage for that crash was set by a number of things that was done by Bill Clinton and reinforced by George Bush. Okay, right. Of course. Okay, the two are equally culpable, okay, for what happened, okay, in my view. Yep. But Clinton was largely culpable in many, many ways.
Repeal of Glass-Steagall, modernization of commodities futures.
You got it. You got it. Absolutely. Absolutely what happened, okay? It would have been worse, except for Monica Lewinsky.
She saved the nation. Yes.
Yes.
Otherwise, they would privatize Social Security.
Exactly. Exactly. You know that story. Great.
And Clinton were ready to sit down, but then another more exciting story for Kenneth Starr and Newt Gingrich popped up. So,
okay. So to get back to the issue then, okay, the issue about which arises is that one thing we really badly need in Congress is a change from the pay-go system to what might be called a go-pay system, one that uses this overt congressional financing to fund spending first and only then takes up the tax bills that would be needed to drain money from the economy to control inflation. Okay, because, of course, if enough money is not drained out of the economy, you're going to have inflation. In other words, even under conditions where you can afford a deficit of 12%, okay, of GDP, that means you can't spend 14%, okay? You can only spend 12%. So there are still budget constraints, but not constraints caused by solvency considerations or solvency problems. There are none of those. Constraints caused by possibly spending too much and getting an inflation episode, okay, that would be serious. So inflation is a real constraint that you have to be concerned about, okay? Yeah. And so the taxing is needed. It's needed for two purposes: to drive the value of the currency, and the second purpose is to drain the necessary money from the economy so you don't have inflation. And so Congress would have to take that taxing duty very, very seriously. Okay, but under the go-pay system, okay, that I propose, CBO would not be projecting over 20 years, okay, or anything like that, especially because it can't really project accurately beyond 2 or 3 months. It's always revising projections after 6 months. And if an episode happens like a financial crash or something like that, all its projections are knocked into a cocked hat anyway.
Yeah. Yep.
They have no reality whatsoever. So these 10-year projections are ridiculous. What CBO should be doing is evaluating the previous impact of what Congress has done on the economy, looking back at the past and looking at impact and helping Congress to actually see what has gone on and evaluate its performance. That's a useful function for CBO. But projecting out to the future is not a useful function for CBO. So we need to stop that. And we need to have the spending first and then the taxing follow it up. Okay, and no pay-go system, because the pay-go system has been a continual drag on progressive economic legislation since the forerunner of the pay-go system got established, along with CBO, in 1974. It's been a continual drag on the economy since that time. 44 years ago now, since Alice Rivlin took over the CBO as the first of the directors of the CBO. So one of the great things that you can do when you get to Congress is to help to change this, because it's what these deficit hawks are feeding upon. It's how they're creating austerity in Washington, okay, and making austerity the order of the day. So I wanted to introduce this and explain that to you in hopes that you can take at least a part of this into your platform. I know you can't explain to people why taxes really don't fund spending right now. There's no way to educate them to that. There's just no way to break through the noise to get that point actually through. But you don't have to break through the noise, because the good news is you can use this simple clause, which solves the problem, and at the same time would educate everybody, because it would soon filter into the media that with this boilerplate in it, the debt would be getting paid off. And taxes would not be funding spending. It would be clear that by spending, Congress is funding the spending. And by taxing, it's performing the proper function of taxing, which is to drain money out of the economy.
That's
it's
an awesome frame. Well, I put it this way: the economy is a political system invented by people, and we
you bet
ourselves invented it. You know, it is in our hands. It's not an invisible hand somewhere out there that takes care of all this. We create it, and therefore this proposal is something to very much take seriously. Like the way you put it, pay, go pay. So, and it's where we're at one of those moments in history where, you know, in 2008, Barack Obama had a great opportunity. Instead, we got picks and shovels instead of actual revolutionary initiatives and programs for our nation. So we could do things right. We have the opportunity to do it. We got great minds. Let's put them to use.
Okay, so we've gone for 2 hours now.
Yes, we have.
I think I need to let you go. I'm going to stay for a little while longer to talk to the viewers who've hung in here for 2 hours and consider some of the reactions and questions they have. But if you would
Absolutely.
like to leave now, it's
Yeah.
fine. If you would like to stay, it's also fine.
I have a young German Shepherd waiting for me.
Oh,
She's
okay.
almost a year and a half, and she's ready for me to take her out. So, thank you so much, Joe. Thank you, Real Progressives. Everybody who's hung in and listened. Check out jacob2018.com. You can reach me at peter@jacob2018.com. Let's continue the conversation. I think we need to push forward. I also want to make the plea to folks, let's not get boggled down with the tribes that we often identify with, whether it is green, whether it is socialist or progressive. The reason why certain governments are able to be successful as they are is the fact that they don't have the duopoly we have. They have the
Yes.
coalitions, and we need to build a coalition of folks to get our economy back going, to put an end to the military-industrial complex, and be sure that we have a government that is responsive to people, not just the special interests.
Okay, but I do have a final thing that I'd like you to tell us, and that is, what is your link for donations?
So if you go to jacob2018.com and you click contribute, you can't miss it. There's two buttons there on the page. There's a red one, and then there's another one right by my YouTube video. Thank you for asking, Joe.
Oh, sure. I think around here we do want you to win.
Thank you. Yes, we and it's again, it's not about Peter Jacob, although the sign is says so. It's about us. We really want to make sure that I'm tired of putting a bandage on issues we could heal in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. I don't want to go back into. I see myself going back into social work. There's a lot of issues that we must fix, and I know I'm not going to see the promised land in my lifetime. But the fact of the matter is, this my nation. We could fix it. I know we can. And so it's who better than a social worker to restore the seat to its rightful owner, the people.
Who better? I completely agree. Okay, so thank you very much for coming, and you have an open invitation to come back. Just
Thank you, Joe.
Contact me, okay, and we'll make arrangements.
Enjoyed our conversation. You have a good one.
So did I. And you too, Peter. Okay, hi everybody. I did want to give you a Q&A. And Gopal really liked this, I guess. He has a lot of thumbs up. And Sandy said the most important thing, Joe, I'm not sure what the most important thing is, but I did get in taxes don't fund spending as well as OCF, okay, in this particular stream. I didn't ask Peter to learn MMT. What I wanted him to do was to learn the policies first. And then I'm quite sure he'll get interested in talking to MMTers who can tell him more about this kind of stuff, because he's going to want to learn about where did this kind of stuff come from. He's got to be asking himself that question. Where did this kind of stuff actually come from? Well, Peter, it didn't come from Jeff Sachs, I'll tell you that, and it didn't come from Robert Reich either. Yeah, 20 of us left, Russell. I think it's probably 19 now, but we're still hanging in. And Dave Leonard says inflation is a concern, but it's so far away, you don't need to consider it. Inflation is way off. Yeah, I agree. Okay, it is way off. Hi, Tricia Y. Roberts. How you doing? And Susan Eldridge says, PAYGO is what happens when you have people in positions of power who don't really understand the consequences of what they're doing. Susan, you are being charitable. I kind of think they did understand the consequences, okay, of what they were doing. But I'm not sure when they understood it, whether they understood it at the beginning or only began to understand it in the 90s or the 2000s. And by that time, okay, were bought off by all the people who wanted to continue it, okay, what it was. All I know is that when she was running around in the 1980s, that Nancy Pelosi seemed a whole lot more progressive then than she is now. She didn't always seemed to be defending the interests of the wealthy back then. I think in the intervening time, she's gotten addicted to the money. The comment says that macroeconomics is a little hard to listen to, but boy, is it powerful. It does something. He is listening, chicken or egg. I've been working in my district for over 10 years, and I make about $11 an hour and no benefit. That's a disgrace. Where is your district, Sandy? Wouldn't be surprised to find it's a district in which a living wage is $26 an hour or something like that. Lots of exploitation going on with adjuncts at the college and the university level. You bet, Susan, you bet. Worse even than K-12. Adjuncts are making less than minimum wage. I know that. That is a travesty and a disgrace. And it preys on the desire of good young people to serve students, to teach students, to be part of the academic life. It preys on their motivation to do that, to exploit them, because they will take starvation wages in order to have the satisfaction that comes from doing that kind of thing. Sandy says, our teachers' union has been fighting since last year on getting a contract. The school board is dug in its heels and it's a poor district. The funding needs to come from the federal government. You bet, Sandy. I know it needs to come from the federal government. I mean, you can't have the state and local governments funding too much because they're just tax limited. They have no policy space. They have no additional policy space to cope with cycles. They suddenly get rich when times are very, very good and the tax money is absolutely pouring in. And then they never put aside enough for a rainy day because they can't do that. And then they end up having to cut people when the rainy day comes, which is no fault of their own. It's caused by the national economy and by federal policies and stuff like that. They're not responsible for it, but they suffer for it. And in this last crash, the teachers and the firemen and the policemen, the first line public servants, they all suffered a lot. It's so hard, I think, to get people to think about what a federal job guarantee might mean. Their imagination seemed to be restricted to, well, there'd be the money and they'd be getting paid for a job. But they don't think beyond into what a transformation of the economy and society it would be to have a comprehensive program like the federal job guarantee. That is one of the really revolutionary things that come out of the MMT approach. Article 5 of the Constitution provides for a convention to revise or create a new constitution. It's very, very dangerous to use Article 5 because Article 5 goes through the state legislatures, which now are controlled by the right-wing nuts and nincompoops. So, I don't think Article 5 is a viable way to go at this point. Maybe with a change in political climate in the country, it could turn out to be a quick way. But I think it's also a very risky way. And she Sexton says, I like Peter. So do I. I like him a lot. I think he's really good. He's one of the most promising people we have interviewed. But we have interviewed a lot of very good people. Richard Dean Winfield, for example, and Lisa Ring, Steve Jaffe, um, um, Tim Canova, Michael Weiss. Okay, and now, but Peter, they've all been very, very good candidates with very good motivations and very good will. But what I've noticed is they have these programs, okay, that they want to pass, and they know these programs are going to cost a lot of money, and they persist in thinking that the taxation problems that are going to arise are problems that they can easily handle, or are details that they can figure out at some later time. I don't think they can do that. I think they need to have an answer to how you're going to pay for it. They need to know how you're going to pay for it. The answer to that question is overt congressional financing. And I showed and explained to Peter tonight. I hope he takes that seriously. He thinks it through. And he puts on his platform how you're going to pay for it. And Susan Eldridge says, Joe, did you send Peter MMT info before the show? No, Susan, I didn't. And the reason why I didn't is because, I think Peter is a busy guy, and that the show had to give him a chance to expound on his own platform, and that he wouldn't have had time to learn the basics, of MMT before the show. What I'm using the show to do is, as Sandy Degg here points out, she says, you have opened a lot of eyes with these live shows, Joe. Okay, I hope I have. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to open their eyes to MMT. Sometimes, as in this show, even without mentioning the initials MMT or modern money theory. I didn't even mention those here tonight. But I did talk about some of the basic principles and the basic ideas, of MMT here. And also the idea of overt congressional financing, which comes out, of MMT. So no, I didn't send him any MMT information to read. Now I'm going to follow up with MMT information to read, including my own stuff on overt congressional financing, some basic articles on MMT, and Stephanie's key article on taxes and bonds cannot finance federal spending. He'll get that. He's going to get a live stream or two. I'm going to send him a number of links for him to explore. And I hope that I've opened his eyes enough that he will explore those things and that he will make this approach his own. Okay, we're down to 12 viewers now. And I think people, are leaving. Mark Fabian says, we could see Peter's wheels turning in his head as you were teaching Joe. Dave Pilkington said ideas are more important than acronyms. I'm with you, Joe. Well, I hope we're right. I think ideas are more important, than acronyms. Acronyms. I tried to get him to understand. Sandy says, you can see when they have the aha moment. So, did he have an aha moment, Sandy? I don't know. And Gopal Vazir says, spoke the perfect English. Yes, he did speak perfect English. Was he born here? Or born over there? I never really looked that up. Of course, it makes a difference because if he were born here, then he would be eligible for the presidency of the United States. So that could make a very big difference at sometime in the future. He's quite young, and it's time to become very popular. Sandy says, yes, he did have the aha moment. Oh, well, thank you, Sandy. I hope you're right. I hope he did. But I'm not at all sure that he did. And Gopal Vazir points out, that India, that Kerala is India's communist state. They've had a communist government there for a very, very long time. Yeah, India is a very, very diverse place. Culturally fascinating, with a history that's fascinating also. At one time I studied India. Well, when I was in undergraduate school, I wrote my honors thesis on the Hindu Jajmani system, a fascinating system that actually existed within the caste system in India. But I was taking a course in government, actually. I majored in government, but had a great interest in anthropology also. And I studied with an anthropologist very well known at the time, who had done his field work in India. Opler was his name, actually. Yeah, Morris Opler. And he was a very, very interesting man. But he was someone who actually awakened me to an interest in India. And then also, when I was at school, in undergraduate school, for about a year, I roomed with an Indian guy who was a Parsi. I like him very much. We got along really wonderfully. And he spoke really perfect English, too, and was very good at slang. And his attitudes were extremely similar to my own. And even though, of course, he didn't have a Brooklyn accent, I sort of at times had the feeling from his attitudes that I was talking to somebody from Brooklyn who happened to speak very well. or speak with the perfect accent. Anyway, I love the guy, and I really enjoyed uh, the time that I spent with him. Sandy Day says he needs to come back, and hopefully he will. Well, I'm sure we'll be able to have a second round before June. The primary is on June 5th, and I'm sure we'll have the time to bring him back, which I very much would like to do. Okay, I think we're running down here. We're down to 12 viewers now. I think we were at 10 a couple of minutes ago. So I guess we gained a couple of viewers. But I think I spent a long time here, and I'm getting to the point where I just like to relax even more than I am relaxed now. Okay, so if you will, if it's okay with everybody, which you can indicate through comments, then I will be signing off for the night. I'm not sure yet on whether you'll see me. I know you'll see me on Thursday of next week. I haven't really decided whether to do a stream on Tuesday as well. And then, of course, you'll see me next week on Saturday for sure, because I'll always do, my regular Saturday night program. So thank you all very much for coming, and thank the people who have left also for coming. Okay, I think it was a very good stream, and Russell asked me, he urges me to go get a glass of wine, and so I guess I have to say, on that note, okay, I'm going to drink to you, Russell, because I've actually been enjoying a glass of wine here since perhaps 10 after 9 or so. I've just been drinking it very slowly. I always have a glass of wine, okay, at 9 o'clock. It's just something which I do. I started it on the Zone diet. I was on the Zone diet for some time. And they recommended a glass of wine as one of the things to have at night. And of course, then the later research pointed out that red wine is very good as a prevention for cancer. So I thought that also provided a good rationale for having some red wine. So that's what I do day at 9 o'clock. So, folks, have a very good Saturday and a very good Sunday. And recall, of course, that Steve's going to have a live stream tomorrow night. And I'm sure that it'll be a live stream, okay, of great interest. I think he'll be interviewing John Loritz tomorrow. He's a blogger and a writer, okay, of great interest. He's a socialist, but he's a socialist who has signed on to the MMT approach. And recently he wrote a very, very good article which laid out the basics, okay, of MMT. And then the thread of that article, the comment thread, led to kind of a battle royale between the MMTers and the partisans of the AMI approach to reforming the banking system. And that was kind of a knockdown, drag out, which cost me quite a few hours. I find those very interesting, actually, always interesting, because there are always a few new wrinkles. But when it goes on for days, it can be slightly wearing for a while. So anyway, John will be here with Steve tomorrow, and I'm sure the conversation will be a fascinating one. So good night. I think it's time to sign off. And so I am going to do that. I'm taking myself out of the broadcast area now. Well, I guess first I'll end the broadcast.